Welcome back to the OSM channel. Now, I recently made a video titled Splitting Stones with Basic Hand Tools. Now, in that video, I showed you how to split stones with basic chisels and hammers. Now, the purpose for splitting those stones was to create a nice flat face in which I could add that stone to my traditional dry stack stone wall. Now, that video did very well. So far, I think it's received around 1,600 views, which is well above average for me. And there have been several requests to do a continuation of that video and try to explain how to stack the stones on the wall. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, real quick, I am building a traditional dry stack stone wall. It is different from a wet stack stone wall in that there's no mortar in between the rocks here. A wet stack means that there's mortar, cement, some type of bonding agent that's in theory locking all these stones together, which I understand the purpose of it. My issue is, over time, these rock walls will shift. And if you use a mortar, maybe not during our lifetime, but our children's lifetime, when that wall shifts, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna go in there and chisel out all the mortar and reset everything? So my preference is to create a traditional dry stack stone wall. This will be here for thousands of years, especially if there's somebody who appreciates it and is willing to come up to the wall and shift stones back into place when things shift. So that's why I really like and I have an appreciation for these traditional dry stack stone walls. So my plan for today's video, we're gonna go get the tractor. We'll head over to another rock wall on the property. That rock wall over there that we're gonna be picking from is just a loose stacked rock wall. I'll show you the rocks that I'm looking for. We'll bring them over here, we'll face them up, and then I'll show you how to lay them on the wall here. Now, by far, the biggest challenge you're going to face if you're making a traditional dry stack stone wall is finding good stones to add to that wall. I've tried digging up stones in the woods, but good luck. What I would recommend is finding other stone walls in the area that you have permission to access and look for nice stones that you can use from that wall. Like this is another stone wall that I have on the property here. This is just a traditional peaked stone wall in a straight line. And this is nice because it presents me with many different options, many different shaped rocks, and from here I can pick and choose what rocks I want. We'll throw them in the bucket of the tractor, bring them over to the rock wall we're working on, and then we can shape them up over there. So, what types of rocks am I looking for? Well, let's try and give you a visual first. So one of the most famous examples I can think of kind of like a traditional dry stacked structure would be the pyramids. Now the pyramid blocks, everything is built on a level foundation and all the blocks are flat on the bottom, flat on the top, but additionally the joints between the blocks are staggered, and this helps to lock everything together. So that's kind of what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for rocks that have a flat bottom and a flat top, and basically something that has a nice flat face too that we can align on the front face and the back face of the wall. So if I look at my stone stack here, this rock right here is exactly what I'm looking for. We have a nice flat bottom or top. If we look at the face, this is the face I would use. You can see it's not perfect. However, if we turn the rock, I don't know if you can see that, but we have a fracture right here. And what that means, it's going to be really easy to face this up because we have that fracture. If we line our chisels the right way, a few taps around this rock, we should have a nice flat face on this rock. So this is definitely a keeper. Now that rock I just showed you, that was about as perfect as you can find. Again, this is the real world, and you're not going to have these perfect stones that jive with one another. You're going to have to overcome and adapt. So in addition to those perfect stones, I grabbed many stones that are close. You know, this one, you can see the top and the bottom aren't completely parallel. A little bit wider here, a little bit narrower here. But we do have a nice flat face, and a rock like this I would absolutely pick up and add because chances are we're definitely going to use this somewhere. Other rocks I tend to pick up, any kind of flat rocks, like a flagstone type rock, I always pick these up. Where these are really handy, for one, if you need to shim a larger rock that you're trying to position in the wall, these are handy as shims. But additionally, when you get to the top of the rock wall, you want the top of the wall to be nice and flat and ideally level, but if not level, you want it to follow the ground. You want it to be parallel to the ground. And if you're just using large rocks, it can be hard to get the top of the rock nice and flat and parallel to the ground. However, if you pick up a lot of these flat flagstone type rocks as you go, what you can do as you move along down the rock wall, you can take these flat stones, put them on top of the wall, and you can just try and get the top of the wall nice and flat. So I always pick up these flat flagstone type rocks. See this rock? Flat bottom, flat top. Not perfect, but we can work with this. So in addition to the stones I've shown you so far, this is another key stone that you always want to keep an eye out for. A long, skinny stone. It might not have the nicest face. We can shape this up a little bit, but these long, skinny stones are critical for the structural integrity of the wall. Now I'm going to try and explain why here. So imagine this is the face of your dry stack stone wall. As opposed to always using small stones that have nice flat faces, like this looks really nice, what you should also be concerned about is every third or fourth course of stone, you want to lay some sleepers. And it's the same idea if you're building a railroad tie retaining wall, right? So at a perpendicular angle to that railroad retaining wall, you want to lay those sleepers back into the ground and have it lock into the soil to prevent that wall from falling forward. Same idea here. And that's where these long, skinny stones become really important. So as opposed to having a perfect face, we're going to use sleeper rocks to tie the face of the wall back into the center of the wall itself and the other side. And this really just helps to lock the wall into itself and just helps to ensure you have a really long-lasting wall. So rocks like this, long, skinny, very important. Okay, two other rocks I want you to keep an eye out for. For one, triangular rocks. Notice how we have a nice triangle, creates a nice flat face. Don't have quite a 90-degree angle. It doesn't really matter what the angle is, but just look for nice triangular rocks like this. And these are really going to be helpful, especially when we're laying some very large rocks on the wall. And we find that when the rocks butt up to one another, they may leave a bit of a V-gap, which sometimes this is unavoidable. Sometimes you just don't want to mess around with those big rocks anymore and they look good where they are. So having triangular rocks really helps to fill in some of those large gaps. You know, ideally we try to lay down a course and have the top of that course flat. So triangular rocks are really going to help you out. This one's darn near perfect. We got a little bit that we got to shave off here, but we'll fit it into the wall when we're ready. Now another important concept is as we build this wall up, we need to fill in the inside of the wall with junk. We want to lock everything together. That's where those sleepers come into play, but also we may need to shim rocks, and we just want to ensure that there's as little space inside the wall as possible. Because as things shift, you know, if there's more junk in there, it'll just kind of lock the wall together and prevent it from shifting as much. So what I'm getting at is keep an eye out for rocks that have a ton of fractures. What I like about rocks like this, I can bring it over to the area that I'm working, hit it with a hammer, it easily fractures apart, and then I have a bunch of gravel and random bits and pieces that I can get in behind the wall, shim up all the rocks, and just ensure everything's locked together really well. So thus far, I've constructed this entire rock wall without cheating. And what I mean by cheating is I have not used any power tools. However, this rock, I've decided that I'm going to cheat. And what I mean by cheat is, take a look at this rock. We have a nice flat bottom, a really nice face that I want to maintain, but we have this surface that pitches forward, and that's no good because when we lay our next course on top of this rock, with this face pitched forward, the rock on top of it is going to want to slide forward over the years, and we want to try and prevent that from happening. So what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to take this chunk off, and we're going to have to flatten this out. Now the issue with this rock, if we look at this rock closely, we have a stress fracture right here. If I were to take my chipping hammer and I were to try and blow this chunk off the rock, something like this, to try and chip that chunk off. What I'm concerned about is this stress fracture opening and somewhat ruining the face of this rock. Then we'd have two pieces. So we have a rock that's, 85% there. If we can remove this little chunk here, it'll be an awesome addition to the rock wall. So, as opposed to doing this the traditional way and likely opening up this fracture, I'm going to take 4.5-inch angle grinder with a diamond tipped cutting wheel, and I'm going to dig in here. I'm going to go back from the face of the rock a little bit to try and hide these lines. But I think that's a much safer way to remove this chunk, and in the long run this is going to save us a lot of time. Again, my first time cheating. And when you're building a traditional dry stack stone wall, you really don't want to show any signs of modern tooling if avoidable. Like if you're splitting granite with a rotary hammer drill and feathers and wedges, I find that completely acceptable because they've been hand drilling rock for thousands of years. You can't really tell if somebody used a rotary hammer drill or not with those holes. Well, I mean, you can, but it's really hard to tell. But I mean, if we see a lot of scoring marks from a diamond tipped wheel on an angle grinder, I mean, that is an obvious sign of cheating. So we're going to start our cut a little bit back from the face. We're going to hide all these lines, and the next rock that's laid on top of this will make all those lines go away. So we're going to get back to that rock that we were working on in a second here. I just want to share with you the tools that I'm working with. So I have a 2-pound mallet, brick hammer. This, I just started using this a day or two ago. About 15 years ago, I bought a bunch of old blacksmith equipment, and this was included in that lot. So basically, it's like a hammerhead on one side and a wedge on the other side. And this is my new favorite tool for splitting rocks. So in the previous video, you saw me just holding on to a chisel and whaling it with the 2-pound sledge, which that does all right. The issues with that, for one, if you miss, you're going to take out your hand, and two, a lot of vibration resonates into your hand. And additionally, you frequently have to move the chisel out of the way to see where your line is. This is a much better tool. For one, it's a bit heavier, so I feel like more of the energy goes directly into the rock. Shorter. Additionally, it's much easier to keep your line because you're further away. And basically what I do, I just kind of scribe my line, and from there I take my 2-pound sledge, knock that line into the rock, and just keep flipping it. And this does a much better job than the chisels at creating a split in the rock, which they do make tools like this with carbide tipped edges. That would be the ideal tool. I just don't have the money for it right now, so doing what we can with what we have. So let's get back to working on this rock. As you recall, we have a stress crack here that we're trying not to disturb. So we took the angle grinder with the diamond tipped wheel, we scribed in a line to follow, and then I took the tool and I did some plunge cuts at a 90-degree angle, and basically I made these dominoes. And now if we go again perpendicular to the dominoes with the chisel, these should just start breaking apart with these. So I'm going to tap this in between a few here, and we should see these start chipping apart. So if we look at the front face of the rock, you can see we did not open up that stress crack anymore, which is what we wanted. We removed that slope. We cheated a little bit, but we got a good result, and now this is a good usable stone. So now we have a nice variety of stone in the bucket of that tractor in which we can start building up this rock wall. However, before we start building it up, we have to figure out what we're doing with the foundation of the wall and where the wall is going. So ideally, you want to dig down below the frost line. Of course, call 811, call before you dig, make sure there's no underground utilities, but ideally you'd want to dig down below the frost line, lay down some 3/4, compact it, get a real nice base. I mean, with doing all that extra work, you will have the best results. It'll last the longest without shifting. However, that's not the traditional way of doing it. The traditional way is just to lay the stones directly on the ground, and as the wall shifts, you just shift it back into position. Now for this wall, I'm just following the radius of the road. So I went 10 foot off the road because typically most towns have a 10-foot right of way. So that now they can't complain about this rock wall. But I did my inside radius, and then as for the outside, I use this device here. So this is called a batter board. Basically, at the bottom of the rock wall, we're about 30 inches wide, but as we come up, we want the rock wall to get skinnier, narrower. And the idea is that over time, the rock wall will tend to want to, lay into itself as opposed to push out. If you build it plumb, the chance of that rock wall blowing out is much higher. So again, you want to build the rock wall into itself as you come up. If anything, I'm actually going a little bit more than 4 inches in. I'm probably going closer to 8 inches in from the bottom to the top. So that's a key right there. Now this batter board also gives me a rough height to follow, which it doesn't have to be perfect, but again, it gives me a rough height. So now that I have my inside radius, I can use this batter board with an inverted paint can. I can mark my outside radius, every couple feet, inverted paint can sprayer, and just spray out my outside line to follow. Now the base stones I'm using, just large rocks that tend to sit flat on the ground, pretty nice face. And to move those rocks around, I'm just using rock bar and a 4x4. Probably like a 5x4, but I'll show you what I do. So you can spend as little time or as much time on this as you want. It seems ridiculous, but I probably just spent 40 minutes getting these 4 stones set properly in here. But you got to think about it this way. These stones are the foundation for the rest of the wall. So if these are rocky, not flat on the ground, then the rest of the wall is going to be prone to failure. Another tip I have for you, stand up frequently and look down your sight line. Ensure that the wall is either following your contour or that it's straight. And again, we want to ensure that this is pitched back into the wall. Use that batter board. So let's move a little bit back down the wall over here. And let's try setting some stones in the wall. It's a slow process, I promise you that. So actually, before we start building on the right here, let's review a section that I completed a few days ago. Now, this isn't perfect, I'm doing my best here, but basic principles again. For one, we want to try and ensure that at the end of every course, everything's flat, if at all possible, which it's not really possible, but you aim for everything to be flat. Notice our joints. You want to try and stagger your joints as much as possible, because that really helps to lock everything together. Again, the wall, it pitches into itself. Aside from that, use shims where you have to. And look, here's an example of how a triangular piece helps to fill in some of the gaps and cracks. So yeah, just takes a lot of practice, a lot of time, but the more time you spend on it, the nicer your wall's gonna look. So this is the section of finished wall we were just looking at, and we need to keep building. I'm gonna start right here in this low spot. My recommendation, what I found, it's easier to start in the low spots, build up your courses of rock, try and get everything flat and level, if at all possible. And then I like to work from one direction to the other. I like to work left to right or right to left. I don't recommend building this up high and then trying to backfill this swale here. Try and bring everything up level and then work in one direction. Goes together a lot smoother. So this is a stone I may want to use, but obviously it needs some work. We have 2 pretty nice flat faces. However, we have this protrusion we need to get rid of. So I'm not sure what to call this. Chipping wedge. I'm sure there's a proper name for it. I'll try and throw it in the comment section, but we need to get this nub out of here. So I'm going to mark a line where I want to hit, and I want to hammer this back into the rock. If I hammer from the inside out, there's a good chance it's going to fracture right here. Some strange line to which I don't really want. So we're going to hammer this line back into the rock. See, a crack's already starting to form. Flip it over. Go the other way. Try and follow that line. Beautiful. Exactly what we were shooting for. So now that we had that protrusion removed, we have a flat surface on the bottom and a flat surface on the top. Now we need a face. Now we have a decent face right here, but if I turn it sideways, you can see we have this section right here, which I don't really like that much. So what I'm thinking we're gonna try and do, we're gonna try and put a new face on this rock. So I'm just eyeing this up right now and trying to see if there's any existing cracks in the rock. But basically what we're gonna attempt to do is we're gonna attempt to split it in half and have a real nice straight flat face. So let me examine this a little bit. I'm gonna try cutting it right here. That is exactly what we were after. So now we have a nice flat bottom, a nice flat top, and we have an absolutely beautiful, perfect face. So it's pretty challenging to explain on camera how to fit the stones in the wall, because there's not really a set of instructions, there's not really a set of rules. Basically, you have to think of this as a giant jigsaw puzzle, only every piece can go in multiple positions, and you can cut each puzzle piece to try and fit into a position that you want it to fit into. So it took me about 15 minutes off camera, but I found a few stones that I like how they sit in here. And again, we're trying to build this section up as to where, you know, it's flat, and then we'll continue from the left to the right. So as you can see, I did have to shim this rock up a little bit. We're trying to ensure that the face of this rock is in line with our other larger stones. And notice how this rock kind of staggers the joint here, which that's what you want. Ideally, I'd love a nice triangular small rock to fit in here. I couldn't find one that fits in there exactly how I want, but I believe I figured out a way to fit this guy in here somehow. So I had it in here, but I'm not really liking how it's fitting now. So what we could try and do, we could try and shave a little bit off this guy right here. Notice there's a little crack right here. Now for something like this, where I want to take a long, skinny sliver off, I would use my wide chisel. And it's tapered to one side. So for this, because I want to blow off this chunk, flat's going to go in on the side I want to keep, and that 45-degree bevel is going to go on the side I want to chip off. So we'll try and firmly plant it. A few light taps along the length. That didn't do what we wanted it to do. Let's see if we can make it work. So not what we had intended, but it actually will fit in here pretty nice if we can shim the back. And that's really important. We need to shim the back. Also, I'm noticing there's a little bit of rock with this rock, to which we don't want. So now all these little slivers from the rocks we've been breaking apart, we have to put them underneath these rocks and shim them. And again, as we go up every course, we need to ensure that these rocks are firmly seated. That is very important. And then just take all your junk and throw it in the little nooks and crannies, the pockets back here. Just really important. Put those there. Okay, so now I want to try and set this large rock that we were working on earlier. So I'm going to show you how to set a stone like this without killing yourself. So, good idea to wear safety toe boots, that's for sure. But all we're gonna do is roll the stone close to the rock wall. And then from here, what you wanna do, you wanna eyeball the stone and try and see if it'll fit the slot you've created for it. Which it appears that there's a good chance it's gonna fit where I'd like it to fit. So from here, what you do, grab yourself a rock bar, a board. I prefer a piece of steel because it reduces the coefficient of friction. So now we're just gonna either slide. See how easy it is to slide this rock? But you could also roll the rock up a 2x4 or whatever. So we have an inclined plane, simple machine. I never lifted up the full weight of the rock. I had to lift up a corner, shimmy it, slide it, but you get the idea. Now whenever you set a big stone like this, ideally you try and get it right the first time, but that's not always possible. Like, I know this isn't going to be a perfect fit, but if it looks close enough, say we're going to leave her. So the fit isn't great on the lower rock, however the side fit is just fine. So this rock is partially set. We have this nice beautiful face on the face of the rock wall. It locks in all right. I got it pretty stable right now, but it's very important that we fill in properly behind this rock. So you can see behind the rock we have all these void spaces, and what you want to do, you want to find a rock that shatters easily and just take all these shims and wedges and just stick them everywhere underneath the rock. So if one of these shims blows out, you know, you have a few others holding the rock in place. You know, like a little earthquake, vibration of the heavy truck, all these little things can cause these little shim rocks to shift out of place. So we're just trying to future-proof this as much as possible. Battery died in the other camera, so I figured I'd finish up this video with the cell phone here. You can see this is slow going work, especially if you're trying to film, but we started here, filled all of that in, and I got to about here. A tip I have for you, keep your tools sharp, especially those chisels. Once they start to dull and round out, you're gonna have a much harder time trying to cut through the rock. When the edges of the chisel round out, the chisels tend to carve a line in the rock as opposed to split straight down. That's why it'd be so nice to have a carbide tipped chisel and rock buster, but maybe one day. Anyway, I also want to talk about those sleepers. Remember earlier on in the video, we were looking for those long skinny rocks. I didn't end up using that one, but here's kind of an example of a sleeper. Like, I could have used this face of the rock on the outside of the rock wall, but it was more important to me to use a smaller face but have this lay back into the rock wall. And again, this really helps to lock in this side of the rock wall with the other side of the rock wall. And again, all the junk just throw in the middle. And very important, if there's any rock within these rocks, get your shims, stick them all back in here, and just ensure that everything is solid. Really, really important. So that does it for today. Not the best day. You have good days and bad days, but just got to keep at it. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for watching. As always, I will catch you on the next one.